Well, there's this curse with world champions and then not doing very well at the next World Cup. Well, that problem England hasn't had in a long time, no? And, living in this country, obviously, I supported, England. But, the 3 matches we played, we celebrated for about 3 minutes. When Toni Kroos made that last second goal, and that was our celebration, 3 minutes long. And yeah,
is that a German thing, 3 minutes long?
No, but it's a sign of the times a little bit in Germany that we are a little bit, how shall I say, a little bit confused in a few areas, and football is one of them.
Well, confused in a few areas. Just look at the UK. Is my mic okay, by the way? Can you all hear me? Yeah? You want me to use the handheld? No problem. Please. All right. I'd love to talk more about football. I've just come back from a month in Russia, which was an absolutely extraordinary experience and fascinating in so many ways, and so many great football stories. But we'll come on to that perhaps a bit later when we talk about leadership. I'm curious to know whether you think it's the right thing for Joachim Löw to stay in charge of Germany. But it overshadowed in some ways for some people what was a really intriguing Wimbledon this year. How was it for you? You must always, I know, love coming back to what feels like your home championships.
Well, it's been my home for a long time. Obviously, I've won this tournament over 30 years ago, before there was internet, before there was color TV. I was winning the championships. And I call Wimbledon my home 52 weeks of the year. And as a local, we don't like all these people coming all of a sudden to the village. It's really annoying. You don't find parking. The restaurants are full, and it's just a lot of police everywhere. And so there was this question about from Claire on the highlight show one night about they have this local rule that they have to close the club by 11 o'clock. Because you have, I don't know, thousands of fans and coming around and just having a drink or two and being too noisy. And whether I like this rule that the Djokovic-Nadal match was then called off after 2-1. And I told her, as a local, I very much like that rule that the matches have to be closed and everybody has to leave. But it's well, Wimbledon always brings the best out in players. We had a lot of stories. The favorites, you can say, didn't win. From a German point of view, we did have a bit of a celebration because Angie Kerber won the ladies. So that celebration was more than 3 minutes. And on the men's side, well, the big favorite, Federer, lost to Kevin Anderson. Then for me, the match of the tournament was Nadal-Djokovic. Whoever saw those 2 days was just the best bet you're going to get from tennis. The final was a bit one-sided because poor Anderson played about 20 hours in that week and just couldn't walk anymore. But he for me, he was really the story because as a total outsider, beating the likes of Federer and in the longest match ever played on Wimbledon Center Court in the semi-final against John Isner, 6.5 hours later, he was able to win. We all forgot the score by 12. Everyone watching anymore. We were just saying whoever has a break point or match point, we would watch. So the question have to be asked whether a tiebreak would be a sensible thing to do. On the other hand, Wimbledon prides itself of always having an open fifth set, but there is a time, especially with these big serving players these days, when it just gets a bit out of hand because whoever wins doesn't have the advantage the next day because you just can't walk, it's too long. So I'm sure they're going to find a solution, maybe at 12-all, to have a tiebreaker because that 26-24 semi-final was just a bit too long for everybody.
Would you support that?
Yeah, very, very much. You have we have 4 majors in the year in Australia. They don't have a tiebreak. The French Open in Paris, they don't have a tiebreak, but they have a tiebreak at the US Open in New York. It's just on grass. It's very easy to hold serve, and if you get 2 big servers, it just gets out of hand. And then who remembers the Isner-Mahou match a few years ago when they played over 12 hours, 3.5 days in one match, and that's when we thought we've seen the worst, but semi-final was not far behind. Yeah.
I was in Wimbledon for that Isner-Mahou match, and it was absolutely extraordinary. There's a plaque to it now, isn't there, on court 16, I think it is, where it all took place. I was reminding myself that you were involved in one of what was at the time one of the longest tennis matches in history when you played John McEnroe back in 1987. Was it a Davis Cup match that lasted 6 hours, 22 minutes? And you had youth on your side, presumably, at that stage. What are your memories of that game?
Well, after 4 hours, you forget. Like many other stories, this one, it was actually 6 hours and 39 minutes, and I'm proud of every minute of it. But for some reason, in some of the books, you're right, it says 6 hours and 22. It doesn't matter after 6 hours anyway. Yeah, those were the days. You represent your country, you play against your nemesis, John McEnroe, in America. It's about staying up in the world group, and you had about 70,000 crazy Americans and 100 Germans, and that's all I needed. So I just didn't want to give in. I didn't want to give up, and neither did John. And then in those days, we didn't like each other much. I think that helped the match. Nowadays we call each other friends. For me, he's one of the best tennis commentators in the world. Even there was a debate because at the BBC they have men and women commentating, but we qualify them not by gender but by quality. And for us, John is the best. That's why he gets paid the most. That's all I say to that. Yeah, I mean, he was a fascinating tennis player. We ended up beating America. They had to go down to the second division for the first time, and we had a big laugh.
That must be immensely satisfying, because it's almost like a tennis player's version of the World Cup, isn't it? I'm curious to know when you and John became friends and how that happened. What was the chemistry there? Was there a moment, or was it just a kind of gradual entente cordiale? How did it work out?
Well, I think a lot had to do with the fact that he's a bit older than me. And I kept on beating him in long matches, and he figured if you can't beat them, join them. and so we have similar personalities, similar temperaments. He's as New York as they come, and whenever I see him they have a beautiful home in Manhattan. Whenever I come to the Open, and his wife and John, they invite us for dinner, and the same goes for Wimbledon. And yeah, he is a very colorful guy, very opinionated, very straightforward. He doesn't hold back, and so am I.
Yeah, I was going to say I would love to be at that dinner party.
Better not. Better not.
Does it go on till the early hours?
No, but we speak from the heart, and then some of it is not principle.
Yeah. I would imagine. Going back to Wimbledon, one of the great stories about tennis, in fact, over the last kind of 12 to 18 months has been the comeback of the senior players, the top players, from serious injury setbacks. So we've seen, obviously, the likes of Federer, Nadal and Djokovic all come back to what is nearly their best, or possibly, you might think, even their best. Andy Murray an exception, perhaps, and we'll talk about him in a moment. And as somebody who yourself struggled with all kinds of physical obstacles and injury difficulties in your career, how do you account for that? How is it just that the science, the expertise of managing injury is much, much better these days?
I like the phrase senior players, because we have a seniors tour, and Roger would qualify for that, but he's still too good at the current tour. So, well, it's called modern medicine. It's called science. That nowadays sports medicine is so forward that they find ways for players to recover quicker, therefore prolong their careers. I think it's a wonderful thing. And I was called old at 28, 29. I played my last Wimbledon at 31. That was usual then. On the other hand, we started winning earlier then than they did now. Winning Wimbledon 17 wasn't that unusual, because we had a guy called Michael Chang and Mats Wilander. They won the French Open at 17. So you had a lot of teenagers back in the day winning early, and nowadays they all looks like they got to be 24, 25 when they start winning. Why that is a long story. I call it, I think they're not mature enough. Now, I don't understand, because at 23, 24, you should be mature enough to understand the importance of winning a Grand Slam. I call it also the phenomenon of social media, I mean, I have this story. Just explains it maybe a little bit in a small example. My second son Elias, he'll be 19. He'll be studying in London film. I'm very proud of him. He's done his school. He finished his school in Miami. Very smart boy. So last year, he lives and dies on the internet like most teenagers do, and he has this weather app, and not only this year, it was sunny Wimbledon, even last year. So he was walking out of the house and he looks at his map and said, "Dad, it's raining again today." And I'm looking up at the sky. I'm thinking, "Damn, what is he watching? It's been blue sky." I said, "Elias, no, it's sunny." "No, Dad, my app says it's raining now in London." And I just said, "Well, why don't you look up at the skies?" And so they believe whatever they read on the internet, and that's unfortunately not always true. And I think that's the phenomenon. When they hit the real world, and when they understand what it takes to win, and all the things that they have to do, that's not on the internet. That you have to experience it, and you have to take responsibilities for your own actions. And I think that's the problem with a lot of teenagers. They don't know what it is. You can't teach coping with pressure. You can't teach how to serve a second serve at break point. You have to do it. And if you don't, you hit a double fault and then you lose. And there's nobody's fault but your own. And it's a phenomenon with a lot of young sporting superstars. They have this huge entourage, and they just sometimes just look to the right, and then they have three people wondering what that look is for. And I think it's about taking responsibility as early as you can, because then you can cope with pressure, and then you're good enough to win a major.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, this is completely unrelated, really, but there was a bit of research out recently suggesting that your child is much more likely to be successful in life if you get them to load the dishwasher, never mind about what school they go to. But something about personal responsibility perhaps lies within all of that. And I was curious to hear, so Elias is 19, did you say?
September.
So your oldest child is how old?
24, is no longer a child.
24. So can you imagine seeing them as they are now, you winning Wimbledon at 17? Does that make that achievement all the more extraordinary? Because it was almost never supposed to happen. I don't think you expected it. You didn't sort of particularly set out with the ambition or expectation that you would win. It sort of happened to you, didn't it? And it was an extraordinary performance. I remember it so well. It's probably one of my earliest tennis memories. But I'm not saying I'm much younger than you. I'm just, that was when it kind of first registered for me. Do you look back on that now and think, wow, how on earth did I even deal with that?
I have all the boys in the house at the moment, and we had a wonderful dinner last night, and we talked about it, and because we were in our favorite restaurant in Wimbledon called San Lorenzo, and I've been going there for 33 years, and I told them all the stories about the dishes before the quarterfinal, semi-final, and it was because of the pasta arrabbiata, and it was because of the T-bone steak and all that. And then, one is 24, one will be 19, and they look at me and they say, we believe you because we've seen footage and we know you, but we can't believe it. And I said, well, that's the story. Now, I was born and raised in a wonderful family, and taking responsibility for your own life was always important. I have my sister in front of me. She's very, she's the smart one of the family. She finished her school and lives in Switzerland, and it was just a different time then. The world worked differently. I was already a professional at 15. I was traveling the world at 15, 16. I had my first own apartment at 16. If I think of my 24-year-old having an apartment in Berlin, I go crazy. So it's just a different time altogether. I wouldn't say better or worse because then was then and now is now, and it wasn't that unusual back in the day to be winning, especially in tennis, something as a teenager. I think the more fascinating story for me is to come back the next day and defend it. Because everybody can have a good day, or you're famous 15 minutes, but to come back the next year when everybody tells you it's impossible, it was impossible last year, but to defend it at 18, because I would have been still the youngest at 18, it's not going to happen. And then I was pretty much left alone in the locker room, and even my coach just kept shaking his head and just said, it's impossible. And then I have to really, believe in your own and dig down and find out what you're made of, how you can take the pressure. And the only thing you can always do is give it your best. Because unless you go on the court and you give it your best and you fight and you play until the end, you don't know. You'll be surprised how many matches, or in many other areas, how many matches you win if you actually play until the last point. Most matches, we've seen it this year, most matches are decided in the fifth set at 24-23, and that back and down the line makes a difference. And that was always my attitude. You always got to play until the end because you don't know what's going to happen.
So for that reason, was that second Wimbledon win for you the career highlight? Was that the most satisfying point? I mean, you've won 6 Grand Slam titles, something like 49 singles titles in total. It's an astonishing roll call of achievement.
Keep talking. Keep a very good job.
I don't trust my research now, given that I got the previous figures wrong. But was that second Wimbledon the one for you?
Yeah, because I think it really defined me as a man. Ever since then, I believe I can take pressure. Ever since then, I always feel that if everything breaks down, I can trust my own shoulders. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be great every year, but you're going to be good enough every year. We're talking again last night, 7 Wimbledon finals and 2 semis. And so Wimbledon was always a good stomping ground for me. I felt comfortable. Once you're able to feel comfortable in that environment, I think you're always going to find one way or the other to win a couple of matches, and I think that's what it meant, winning again.
What's it like then? That kind of pressure. What's it like from the other side as a coach? You coached Djokovic for 3 years, very successfully. He won 6, I think, Grand Slam titles under your leadership. It's obviously a completely different kind of pressure. Is it worse? How would you categorise it?
Yeah, it's very different. From an ex-player's point of view, it's probably worse because I'd like to have the racket and ball in my hand under pressure, and I have to trust my player to serve an ace. So it's. I think everything has its time, and when you're 25, you want to be a player. When you're 45, you'd rather be a coach. But it's always, the magic is always between the chemistry, the player and the coach. And if you feel like you talking to someone who's open, who wants to get better and who wants to improve and who wants to maybe see things in a different way, then it's not that difficult for a coach. But nowadays it's not often that you coach a player, but you coach his team as well. And that includes his wife, his family, the agent and all that. And then they very much play part in the life of players these days. And they make decisions that are not always good for the player. So the key is always to have a one-on-one situation, a personal, almost an intimate relationship with the player, that there is a moment every day that you and I talk privately, nobody's in the room, and then we look each other in the eye and we make a decision that nobody's business is. And I think that's the secret of a successful relationship.
And why did that relationship come to an end? Was it simply that you felt that you had gone as far as you could go, the two of you together?
Yeah, I mean, he couldn't win anymore. I mean, there was a moment he had all 4 majors in 1 year. He was almost invincible, and he needed a break. He was tired. He wanted to enlarge his family, and the professional is they became parents of their daughter the following year. So he's an expert in priorities, and tennis wasn't the #1 priority. And I said, Novak, then we will always be friends. You can always call me on a rainy day, but I think you should be with your wife a bit more.
Yeah. Well, I think that's pretty remarkable in professional sport, someone at the level of the game that he is in. I think it's quite surprising to hear that, actually. And maybe everybody needs periods in their life where they acknowledge that. It reminds me a little bit of the Gareth Southgate thing over the summer, talking about Fabian Delph coming back for the birth of his child, saying family is more important. And I suppose to have a successful team and to have a successful career, you need to recognise that.
Well, he still had other 18 players to choose from. You know, in tennis, if one player goes away, there isn't another one coming back. So,
yeah, I get it. I just want to talk about the football, and we still got further than you. Let's talk a bit about Andy Murray. We would all, I'm sure, everyone here, love to see him back at his best. It does seem like it might be one step too far for him physically. I don't know how much you know about kind of what he's been through and his back operation, his hip, wasn't it? Do you think that we're going to see him back and in that winning form again?
Well, I saw him at the weekend, the wedding in Switzerland, and if you ever see him doing a stand-up in a wedding, you've never laughed more in your life. I mean, if you think he was boring and dull, you don't know Andy Murray. I mean, I told him afterwards, if it doesn't work out with the tennis, go on the circuit, become a comedian. You were brilliant. Well, he's been out for 1 year, and usually it takes you the same amount of time to come back. Now, the question is to come back to what? He's playing the summer hard courts, and I thought he had a pretty decent grass court season. No, he didn't play Wimbledon, so he's feeling a lot better. But to come back to number one, boy, it's a busy spot. You know, there are so many players that want to be number one and are number one, so it's a long way back. And that's the question ultimately he has to ask himself. Do I want to come back as number 50, number 30, number 10, number 5? And his game is based on running. You know, he's been one of the fittest players of all time. He just gets to every ball and then hits it past you. So does the hip hold up the wear and tear of a best-of-5 match, of a Grand Slam, 7 matches? Only he will know, and only he will have the answer.
It's often, when we talk about and lament the fact that we don't have greater depth in tennis in terms of decent players in this country, one thing I think about as a parent is, would I want my child to have to go through what it takes to be a top tennis or top sports professional, full stop? And you mentioned the wear and tear on your body, because you, as all professionals do, you live with lifelong consequences of that career, and it's absolutely punishing, isn't it?
Well, don't we all?
I don't think
for the things that we do in your 20s and 30s, you know, it has consequences in your 50s or 60s. So, and the question is, would you want to stop your child from doing something he or she loves? Is it difficult to be a successful tennis player? Yes, so it's difficult to be successful in anything. And yes, everybody has a different style. Mine was very physical, so I do have new hips and I have new ankles and all that. It's true, but not everybody played like that. I think a sport as such is wonderful. I think it's a great way to explore the world. When you're in your 20s, it's a great way to make friends. It's a great way to see different cultures. It's a great way to earn a living. You know, how successful you're going to be, nobody knows, unless you try. So I think in principle, sport is good. If your only goal is to become number one, then maybe not, because there are thousands of players who want to have the same spot. But if you want to do something that you really truly enjoy, then why not?
But if your littlest child came to you and said, "I want to be a tennis player, Daddy," you would say.
Well, I have 4 children. My youngest is 8, and my oldest, he was actually very good in basketball. And he was 16. He made it to the German national team, but he was living in Miami at the time. And I said, "Well, the first back in the NBA." I said, "Here we go. We have a home run. I'm going to have always the best tickets, right?" And then he told me at 16. He said, "Dad, can I talk to you?" And I was always trying to. I was always trying to teach my children to be open about opinions and to learn to debate, because I like the conversations and discussions at home. And he said, "Dad, your parents allowed you to do what you love doing, right?" And I said, "Yeah, it was tennis, which was great." And it's well, my love is music. It's not basketball. Would you allow me to go after my passion? He's 16. And I had to swallow a little bit, and it took me 2 days. And I said, oh my God, he's going to make the NBA, Miami Heat, Chicago Bull. I'm thinking, you know, and then we gave each other a big hug, and I said, yeah, as long as you're going to be the best musician you can be, there's no excuse. Then next week I want to be an architect, or 3 weeks later I want to be a lawyer, or I don't know what. if it's art, then go ahead. And now many years later, he's got his own band. He's a very successful artist in Germany. He makes his own money with it, with his passion, and that's all you can ask for.
Well, and good luck to him, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's to be applauded. Do you have 4 boys?
3.
3 boys and a girl. And by the way, I'm aware, because we are approaching 10 o'clock, and it's completely understandable if you need to go. That's fine. We're going to continue warbling on for a little bit longer, but feel free to make your way out if you need to. You mentioned gender pay. I wasn't going to bring it up. But where do you stand on women and their pay in tennis? What's your view on that? Do you think it is absolutely right and appropriate that they are paid the same, even though, and I know you've been asked this question before, even though they play less tennis?
Well, I'm absolutely for it because I think Wimbledon has plenty of monies. They're not struggling for turnovers, and you know, women as much part of the show as men. Whoever saw the Cinderella story of Serena Williams this year at Wimbledon, from having a child, you know, 9 months ago, to becoming a Wimbledon champion again. It would have been the greatest sports story maybe ever. Unfortunately, she lost to a German. And I think it's very important. It's part of the story. I think Wimbledon, or tennis wouldn't be the same. And you know, it's again, you're not taking from somebody who doesn't have any. You know, and I think that's ultimately, you know, they play as well as they can, as we do. You know, we play best. The arguments will be, you know, look at how many hours Kevin Anderson played to Angie Kerber. He played probably 5 times as long because he can, and you know, he's just built differently, and therefore I wouldn't even talk about it, because for me it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. And women just tend to be more efficient about most things anyway, so that may be an explanation. She is absolutely phenomenal, Serena Williams. Who is the male tennis equivalent to her, just in terms of her dominance of the sport, and perhaps the way she's come back from an extraordinary kind of physical obstacle as well? Is there a male equivalent to her?
Well, I would call him Roger Federer, no? He didn't give birth to a child. That's maybe the one difference. But he had injuries. He was out for a month, and he's 37 next month. And he's the absolute greatest of our sport. 8 Wimbledons, 20 majors, and still called one of the favorites wherever he goes. And tennis will wake up one day and understand the times we're in right now. You know, we take it for granted. We take it for granted for Serena to come back and Roger to play, and how much they win, and how strong personalities there. I think the younger generation has an awful lot to do to be anywhere close to these champions. And on the men's side, you have a Nadal, you have a Djokovic, you know, you have an Andy Murray. And on the women's side, you have less superstars at the moment than you have in the men. And I was commentating the Djokovic-Nadal match. It's one of the best matches I've ever seen as a tennis lover. And I just find that the younger generation has to pick up the slot soon, because these guys get older and eventually they won't play anymore. So it'll be a sign of the times once we don't see those superstars anymore.
And how do we get that younger generation? I'm talking kind of, right, getting back to the beginning of that process, the 5, 6, 7-year-olds. How do we get them to pick up a tennis racket more? Every year we talk about it. Every year we talk about improving grassroots facilities, improving access for kids from all different backgrounds in this country, certainly. And I'm sure the same debate goes on in Germany and elsewhere in the world. How do you encourage that?
Well, first of all, tennis is not a cheap sport, so you have to provide the facilities, you have to provide the access to make it as easy as possible for anybody, if they want to play tennis, to do so. It takes leadership. I don't want to get too much into politics of the LTA. I don't want to get too much into politics of the profit Wimbledon generates for grassroots tennis and who's responsible for it. But it's all about leadership, and we have systems in France and in Spain and even in Germany that work, I'd say, better. So we have players coming up and juniors. For some reason, it doesn't happen in this country, and it's a shame because obviously you always need a local hero. You need somebody from these shows to be in the semi-final to make the sport even more popular. But it was 77 years between Andy Murray's Wimbledon win and Fred Perry's last win, and it's too long, and you don't understand why that is. Now that has, I think, something to do with politics in this country in principle, and it's a shame because tennis or sport is such a communication vehicle like nothing else. There's music and there's sport. You have the greatest tennis tournament in the world in London at Wimbledon, and for 2.5, 3 weeks, the whole world is watching what is happening in London, and it would be great if you've seen more British players going further.
Yeah. You say it's to do with politics. You mean the kind of internal politics of the whole tennis infrastructure in this country? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, you have a tennis center called the National Tennis Center of Roehampton, which is the state of the art. It's just empty. There's just nobody playing. There is nobody responsible for it. That's what I mean. There isn't responsibility about tennis, and I think that's the problem. There isn't a person or two you can say, okay, now you're in charge and you make the rules. There are 5 people or 10 people, and they change every other year, and that's the problem. There isn't a famous head to say, okay, we're going to go left or we're going to go right.
Another area of perhaps Wimbledon being dragged into the 21st century. I was just reading today actually about the fact they're considering using artificial grass on the court at Wimbledon. Have you heard about this? And do you think that would... I mean, artificial grass these days, it's not like the old AstroTurf of many years ago. It's where they kind of thread tiny blades of artificial grass, don't they, to sort of effectively strengthen the grass surface. But would that be blasphemous in your view to do that at Wimbledon?
Well, I think ultimately it's called there's no football on telly because there are no stories to write about. So you have to come up with stories like AstroTurf and Wimbledon. I think as long as we both live, there won't be anything but grass.
Really?
At SW19. But the Premier League only starts in August. The World Cup is over. You finish your celebration as a semi-finalist, and therefore we have to cover the next 2-3 weeks.
Okay, so I think your position on that one is pretty clear. Let's talk. I mentioned at the beginning, it's been an extraordinary year for you in many different ways. You've had financial issues that you've had to deal with, and you've also taken on this new position as an attaché for the Central African Republic. Some people have conflated the two issues, but you say that this is something that you are absolutely committed to. Tell us a bit about how that came about and why you wanted to do it.
I put some water here into the glass just to, I figured you're going to go in that direction. Well, I have a family history with Africa. And as a very white boy, I'm well respected in Africa, and I have an understanding what it means to have family difficulties, because my mother also was an immigrant. So there's a number of family issues you wouldn't understand when you look at me. That has been part of my 50 years. And therefore I was asked by the president to have a special role in representing Central Africa through the world, through sports and culture, which I'm very familiar with. That's a process that doesn't happen overnight. We are in good conversations. I can't give you all the details because we're not alone in the room, but it's a responsibility I'm very proud of, and I'd like to continue for a long time. Now you you read stories about me in the newspaper, and there's a football break, and I'm a colorful guy, and I'm opinionated. Some of it is not true, and sure, there are more important things to worry about, whether some of the stories you read about Boris Becker are true or not. But so with my life choices, I may surprise you or some of the others, but my family was never surprised by my life choices, and I was always taught to be independent and to live a life that I believe in. Otherwise, I wouldn't be strong enough to win Wimbledon 17 as well. So it's done me well. Was it always easy? No. Could I have it easier? Yes. Do I like it easy? No. I like to be convinced in the things I do. I like to have reasons to get up in the morning, and that's just part of it. I've big responsibility for all my 4 kids. They're all mixed race, and they understand me better than everybody else.
So it is clearly a deeply troubled country with a very difficult past. What do you hope to achieve in this role? What's your ambition? I know you are deeply committed to humanitarian issues and furthering those kinds of causes. Have you anything specific in mind?
Well, it has a difficult past, but it's a democratic elected president. He's very well educated. He's a math professor out of university in Paris. He wants to change the country. He wants to make it more open. He wants to invite international business. And nobody ever spoke about the Central Republic of Africa ever since he appointed me, for example. I mean, if you ever ask anybody in the room a month ago, they wouldn't have said, who, what, where, the continent. Now a lot of people know about it. Just that alone was the right decision for him to do. And the struggles that this country faces, most African countries struggle with, and most countries in the world struggle with. It just needed a facilitator. He needed somebody that can talk about it, and so here am I.
Yeah. You talk about countries around the world having their own kind of difficulties, and it was really interesting for me being in Russia during the World Cup, because clearly the impression that had been given of the World Cup was that it might be, a very kind of testy tournament. And I'm certainly not sitting here as an apologist for President Putin by any means, but I think it allowed us, an event like that, to see a different side of Russia, to separate the politics and the people in power from the people in the country. Yeah. And that was really illuminating, I think, both for me personally. I'd travelled there a little bit before, so I knew a bit of that. But I think particularly for the fans who were travelling there as well, for the England fans who didn't expect to be so warmly received. And we heard this time and again from those who made the hundreds of miles of journey to get over there and support their country. And I think that was a real lesson in learning to perhaps understand that geopolitics is multi-layered, and there are many sides to the story, and I guess that's something that you are learning through this whole process.
Yeah, I mean, I consider myself a journalist, and I'm a sports journalist. I commentate live in front of millions and millions of people, and every word that I say, it's heard. So I have to be very careful, yet understanding what I'm talking about. I think we make it too easy just to talk about something we don't know. And when we live in London, it is a great city. It's my home. It's very difficult to really understand other cultures and nationalities unless we go there. We just don't know. And if you go through television and you listen to CNN, you listen to BBC, and you listen to Al Jazeera, you get 3 parts of the truth about the same story. So unless you go there yourself and you spend some time and you get your own experience, you truly understand what the problem is. And I think that's what the World Cup showed. Again, sport is a facilitator. It's the greatest communicator in the world. And when you read just a week before the World Cup, you were afraid to go. It wasn't safe, and this and that, and as much as I'm a football fan as you are, and all the fans that came back and said we had the best time ever, and we've explored Russia. We've never heard of some of the cities, and it was friendly and safe, and the food, and of course the vodka was good too. And all of a sudden they have a total different point of view about Russia, and I think that's the power of sports, and that's why we have the Olympics. That's why we have the sports. But we as journalists, we have to be careful not to be judgmental about something we don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Although it is important to point out that you and I as journalists have a freedom in this country that's not afforded journalists in Russia. But, you know, there are, as we say, many sides to the story. You've alluded to the fact that you've made bold decisions throughout your career. Do you have any regrets?
Well, I mean, whoever hasn't done a mistake in their life, now they raise their hand or leave the room. You know, I see 2 people leaving now. Okay, so 2 out of 100 haven't done a mistake. Yes, of course. If you would know always the outcome, we would sometimes decide differently. But what's the fun in it? If you always know everything better, you're probably going to stay in your bed all day. So it's part of the process. You know, if you mature, if you grow up, if you want to get your own opinions, of course you're going to make a mistake or 2. Now at 50, would I regret it? No, of course not, because it made me the man who I am today. But did I have some difficult times? Of course. But I don't fault it. I think it's called you know, growing up. It's called of making up your own mind. I want to know what's happening in Moscow. I want to know, you know, whatever I want to believe in. I want to explore myself. And if I see, you know, tennis is a very strategic game. And if you want to be successful, you always have to play percentage tennis, meaning you're going to, ultimately, if you see a long tennis match, you'll be surprised that the winner sometimes makes 3-4 more points. That's all. And you play 150 points. Sometimes, you know, there was one match I was commentating, actually the winner made 1 less point than the guy that lost the match, but he made the last point. So I'm a big believer in winning the last point. And I'm a big believer in percentage. So my life has been definitely 51% positive. I had moments when it was 100%, and I had moments when it was 10%, of course. But I'm above average now, and I like it.
That's a great position to be in, I think. If only one of us could sit here and say that, we should be pleased with ourselves. And is that, in a sense, and again, you mentioned this about with your kids and spending life on the internet, are sportsmen and women these days too conscious of their brand, of their image? Is that almost too tightly controlled that there isn't room to make those kinds of mistakes?
Well, yes and no. You know, you see these football stars now being adored as gods, and then you know, thankfully, you know, they're on the internet and they you know, do their own tweets and their own Instagram posts and everything. There's one picture that's not 100% clear, and they get crucified. How could they make a picture with this and that, or how could they say? So it's, and then on the other hand, you call them they don't have personality. So which way you want it? You want to have computers, you're under machines with no opinions, it's just blank, or you want to have colorful sportsmen and women. And I think it's always it's always about the balance. It's always about to get the right percentage. But it's a difficult life as a young man these days. I mean, yes, we all are on the internet. We all have our phones, and you know, when they want to have a beer or 2, and they're, you know, old enough to do so, and there's a fan sitting across the club, and they take a picture, it'll be publicized the next day in the newspapers, and the player has to explain that it was a Monday night, there was no match, and then he had a beer, even a single guy, a woman, you know, what's there to explain? And I think that was different in my days. You know, thankfully there was no cameras then, thankfully. But it was a much easier time then. You know, I find young players, they have to grow up so much quicker than we used to do. And I think it's a reflection of their performances sometimes. So I don't envy these players. But it's just
hand, the advantage is, on the other hand, that you have a direct line of communication, so that you can, in a way, circumvent the media, can't you, and have that direct contact with fans.
No, I find it very important. I think a lot of sportsmen and women use it very wisely. On the other hand, then their agent says don't, because then they know what you feel. And I find it very confusing nowadays. Of you want to have a player take responsibility at midfield, and yet when he goes off the pitch, he's supposed to have no opinion. So it's very difficult. You know, you can't have it both ways. And there's the, you know, for me, one of the fascinating things about the World Cup was that, where was Messi? Did he play? Where was Ronaldo? Where was, I can call 15 Germans. Where were they? The England squad, it wasn't the star, it was the squad that was the star. It was the team. And for me, the winner of the World Cup was the fact that as a team, they were strong. And with France, I mean, France didn't have 1 or 2 superstars, they had 22. But the star was the team, and I think that maybe is a reflection of how it should be. It shouldn't be about 1 or 2 persons, it should be about the squad.
Were you cheering on the England team when Germany were out?
Well, I'm living in Wimbledon. I like to be friendly with my neighbor. What am I going to do?
I'd like to do some kind of, almost like quick fire questions, but these are not always easy to answer. But let's give it a go anyway. Will Andy Murray win another Grand Slam title?
It's all about the hip.
So often is. Who is the next great big superstar in tennis? Put aside those top 4 players that we've referred to. Who's the next big star?
I can give you a couple names, but they haven't won a major yet. So I like Zverev, Germany. I like Kyrgios, but they haven't won anything close to a major. So, there's often a lot of hype about not much. So I'd rather want them to win a bit more, and then we can talk about them.
When is Roger Federer going to retire?
He just signed, I think, a pretty good contract with a Japanese sportswear company. Last time I checked, we had the Olympics in 2020 in Tokyo. I think that's his plan. Will he play at 40? I hope so. Hopefully he takes care of his body.
That would be absolutely extraordinary, wouldn't it, if he was still playing to that level at the age of 40? It's a lesson for us all, I guess, in that one. When is Germany next going to win a World Cup?
Well, we won the last World Cup, didn't we? So
you've got 60 years to sit back and relax now.
We have 60 years. We did win 4 altogether. I think you guys won 1. Was it against Germany with this funny goal that was sort of okay. I'm a little bit skeptic at the moment with Germany because we don't seem to have the right balance between German players and I call them international German players, and I think that was our strength before, and that's our weakness now.
And you said it was a brilliant interview with 5 Live recently. I think this is right, that you were more nervous about dancing at the championship ball after winning Wimbledon than you were about actually heading out onto the court, centre court for the final. Because you were 17 years old, you were having to dance with Martina Navratilova. So how is your dancing now, and who is your ideal dance partner?
I mean, wouldn't you be afraid as a 17-year-old to dance with Martina Navratilova? I mean, come on. I mean, it's so much easier to hit the serve. Yeah, but what they didn't tell me is that on that night they canceled the dance because they felt sorry for me, I think. I've seen the dance this year between Djokovic and Kerber. They look pretty good. I mean, they look like they've done this before. I don't know. Let's see what the next dance will bring.
Do you do dad dancing?
What?
Dad dancing. So
yeah.
you were at this wedding at the weekend?
Yeah, yeah. I wasn't until the bride's mother and the groom's mother persisted. I mean, that's my fan these days. You know, they're wonderful women, but they're slightly older than me. And they asked me to dance with them, and then I finally did have a go for 1 or 2 songs. Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing, finally, I wanted to ask about is I'm about to go on holiday with my family. We're going somewhere with a tennis court, so we will play very competitive but very bad tennis for the course of 2 weeks. But we're also a big poker playing family, and I know you're a serious poker player, aren't you? So have you got any tips for me? Never mind the tennis. I need to win at poker.
Yeah.
How's your poker face?
Well, it's good sometimes and it's bad others. The secret about poker is never play your cards. Always play the opposition.
That's very profound. That's obviously where I've been going wrong. Boris, it's been an absolute delight to talk to you. Thank you very much. And as I say, once again, we're sorry to have kept you waiting, but it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for your time coming here this morning. I hope you've enjoyed it. Boris Becker, many thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.